Brian, and so he asked if he could get back on. So, Brian, we're putting you back on. You're in Georgia, you're on with Matt and Tracy, and you say precepts say their worldview is justified by God. How can we have a conversation with them about this? You there, Brian?
Hey.
Hey.
I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Wonderful. I just wanted to tell y'all hi. Hi, Tracy. Hi, Matt.
Hi.
I've been a fan of the show for some time, and I haven't ever called in a show before today.
All right, first time caller.
I'm excited to be here.
So on the precept thing, Talk Heathen had a guy who was essentially a presuppositionalist call in, and we were originally going to ask him to call in as well, but now he's no longer welcome to talk to me when I'm on the show.
Yeah, I heard that.
Yeah, it's incredibly frustrating.
I had kind of been rolling this idea around in my head for a while. In fact, I had seen watched the debate you had with Matt Slick in regards to secular morality.
The one you should watch, and you'll have to forgive me for even recommending this, is the debate that I did with Saiten Bruggencate, who's a presuppositionalist.
I saw that one too.
Yeah, the truth about this is that I presuppose the logical absolutes and continue to consider them and value them. I'm not absolutely certain about anything, and will continue to value them until somebody demonstrates that there's a reason not to, because they continually to demonstrate their usefulness, and we can't reason without them. Precepts go a step further in saying, I can account for the logical absolutes. God is the foundation beyond the absolutes. And I prefer to use Occam's razor and not multiply entities unnecessarily. So if I presuppose the logical absolutes, and they also agree with me about the logical absolutes, and they presuppose a foundation behind that, why? First of all, they can't demonstrate. They can't demonstrate this foundation. They can just assert it, and they can make claims like, "Well, without it, you can't know that reason is reasonable." Well, I don't need to know. Gravity works whether I know why it works or not. I could be correct about why gravity works. I could be incorrect about why gravity works. I could not know, but it works. And that's the same thing with reason. The foundations of reason are either reasonable, which they continue to demonstrate that they are. As a matter of fact, you would have to assume they were true in order to even attempt to prove they were false, which means you cannot get there. As far as I can tell, I can't go any further back in time than the Planck time to evaluate, and the notion of before the Big Bang doesn't make sense. And for me, the notion of what serves as a foundation for the logical absolutes doesn't make sense, because nobody can demonstrate any such foundation. Some things, it is entirely possible, just are without any reason why.
Yep. And I understand that, and I'm in complete agreement with it.
Oh, and if they object to that, then you get to point out that they think that God just is without any reason why.
Except you can't even demonstrate that like you can a logical absolute.
Right.
I mean, you might argue about whether or not it's absolute, but you can certainly show that it applies to everything you can think of or everything you can observe.
Yeah, I'm just saying, when you say there are some things that just are without known reasons, if they object to that, the thing they're asserting fits that category.
Right.
And that demonstrates a conflict.
Yeah.
Well, the problem, as I see it, is that whole conversation right there is just a red herring. I mean, I understand you can get into the philosophy of it and talk about the logical absolutes and whether or not you have a basis for presupposing those, but it really didn't get into the meat of the subject. Like with the debate you and Matt Slick had, it really didn't get addressed by him as far as whether or not the topic of the debate was addressed. It went into, the brain fizz thing.
Yeah.
So my question is there a way to get past that to actually have a conversation? And one of the things I had kind of been rolling around in my head was whether or not you could just say, all right, well, you have God as your absolute, universal, whatever kind of jargon you want to use, your basis, and mine is Bob. Bob says that this is that, and Bob is my foundation, and you can't question Bob because of Bob.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that, as long as Bob is properly analogous to the solution that they're offering, because it shows that they have no more. They will go down other routes. There's countless apologetics. If you try to do something like this, then you'll get into argumentum ad populum, where it's like, oh, well, countless people throughout almost all societies have believed in a God, and yet nobody believes in this Bob thing, which doesn't prove that you're wrong. But the answer to your question was, is there a way to get around it? And the reason I said no so quickly is because if the person you're talking to does not and will not get around it, then nothing you try is going to make any progress. If, you're not going to get a presuppositionalist to get outside of that framework until they want to.
Right. And that's kind of the thing. I'm trying to figure out, are they honestly stuck that they feel like they can't have a conversation without your worldview being the same as theirs? Or is this just a complete diversion to get away from talking about what you wanted to talk about to begin with?
It's for me, and while I don't actually read minds as much as I might pretend to, the entire presuppositionalist argument is, here are some people who are terrified of not having an answer, and now they've got one. And they've got one that you don't have, and you're willing to acknowledge that you're okay not having an answer, and all they're going to do is keep throwing it in your face that without an answer, you can't know that reason is reasonable. Well, what they're doing, and what happened today on Talk Heathen, was they're setting up two things. They are saying that absolute certainty is required for knowledge and rationality, which is not true for either of those, and that faith is any belief held in the absence of certainty. Well, I don't think there's any path to absolute certainty ever. So what I do is I draw a line and say everything on this side of the line is absolute certainty, which I don't think we can get to, and everything on this side is varying degrees of confidence, and we proportion those to the available evidence, and then somewhere further down here there's a line where I then define everything that's out further there on the left to be a faith thing, because faith is the excuse you give when you don't have a good reason. And so when you give good reasons for your belief, what is their response? It's to question reasoning itself. Aaron Ra gets incredibly frustrated at anybody who goes down this line, because ultimately it comes down to them just saying, you can't know that reality is real. You get into issues of solipsism, you get into all kinds of issues. But knowledge doesn't require certainty. Yeah, knowledge doesn't require certainty. Reasonableness doesn't require certainty. I've never advocated, or at least not advocated for certainty in the past probably 13, 14 years, or maybe less than that for absolutes. I presuppose the logical absolutes. And I'm fine with that, because my confidence level in their applicability is proportional to the continued evidence and the absurdity of this notion. They might as well be saying, why do you get to say that this is a contradiction? Because it is. Oh, why do you get to say contradictions are bad? Maybe they're not, but they are conflicting with sound reasoning. We know, this is like earlier call today, humans can reason, and we're pretty good at it, even though we're bad at it on occasion. And I would never use reasoning. And by the way, science doesn't require absolute certainty. Science isn't making proclamations about truth. Science is saying, hey, given all the available information, here's the best we got, and we'll revise it when we get better. I think that is infinitely more honest than Magic Man done it.
Right. And it just kind of comes down to, what seems to work and what keeps working. I don't feel like I have to have a logical, a foundation for all this to know that this water bottle is going to carry water and I can drink out of it. And I keep doing that, and it keeps on working.
Yeah, I mean, I use the example of crossing a busy street and either using the data that you have based on your observations of vehicles coming, or ignoring that data, and whether you believe that the outcomes in trying to cross the street would be the same, or if you think there would be better outcomes predicted based on observing the traffic and actually conforming to that as evidence that it's not safe to cross.
Am I absolutely certain that there's not an invisible, inaudible bus heading at me at 60 miles an hour? No, because I'm not absolutely certain of anything. But I'm reasonably confident that I have no reason to believe that there is an invisible, inaudible bus coming at me, or that one even exists, or anything like that. Am I taking it on faith that there's not an invisible, inaudible bus? Well, I guess it depends on your definition of faith. But if you want to call it faith,
I don't think
whatever faith I might exercise in not thinking there's an invisible, inaudible bus coming at me is fundamentally different from the people who are using faith to say, there's this magical being that exists outside and inside of space and time, and he cares who I sleep with.
Yeah. And I don't think that's the definition of faith that we're talking about, as far as whether or not you trust your senses to go across the street and not get hit by an invisible bus that you couldn't see. I don't think that's the same kind of faith as what people are talking about when they're talking about their faith in God or any sort of religious stuff. And unfortunately, I think that the caller earlier, Talk Heathen, fake name, he calls and seems like the only thing he wants to do is have somebody say, I have to use faith for this.
Yeah.
In the same way that we're talking about crossing the street.
He wants to get those guys to say that they are exercising faith, because then he gets to say, well, so am I, and you don't get to poo-poo my faith because you're faith. But here's the thing. I've driven in a car and looked to my right or looked to my left and checked my mirror and saw no car and started to move over into that lane and then saw a car. Now, was it in my blind spot? Because I know I have one. We can demonstrate that. Was I just not paying attention? Did I not move my head around enough? Or was that car actually invisible? And so when I evaluate these things, I'm going to assign a rough probability to them. And it's probably that I wasn't paying enough attention and did not properly check my surroundings. It's less likely that a car was invisible and became visible right as I was getting ready to move into that lane.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I certainly understand that. The problem, I think, with the word faith is that it's kind of slippery, and that it doesn't always mean the same thing to different people. And I like that you often use confidence in talking about what you expect based on prior knowledge, based on prior experiences.
And the only answer,
keep on holding water.
The only response that precepts can do is to say, well, how can you trust your senses? How can you trust the prior information? And the answer that Tracy and I would both give is, what other choice do I have?
Yeah, what am I going to go on if I can't go on that? How do I proceed at all?
Yeah.
Why should I not trust the thing that is the only thing I can demonstrate?
Yeah.
And
that's what I'm trying to point out with the absurdity of Bob. Bob tells me, I don't trust myself. I trust what Bob tells me. And Bob tells me that this is true and that's not, and that you can't have a worldview in which you can trust your senses or know that that's this, except for if you also believe in Bob.
It may be good for making a point. My biggest objection to it is that I don't believe, Brian, that you actually believe in Bob. I think you're offering it up. And so I think that any precept that you're arguing with is going to say, well, you don't actually believe in Bob.
And I don't know if this is correct or not, but I mean,
not question Bob.
The first thing I would think of, like as a Christian in the past, is that I would probably end up saying, how is Bob just not another label for my God?
Yeah.
Right. Well, Bob doesn't like your God.
Yep.
But that's it's like. The question is whether or not this person wants to actually have a conversation in regard to, epistemology, in regards to religion or apologetics, or if this is just their shtick and they just want to just throw this out there and that's it.
I think most apologetics is just about getting the heat off. I mean, in my opinion, most apologetics is about how can I just get the heat off.
I can tell you the one thing I've done consistently over many years in many debates that absolutely, it's from Christians in particular and from theists in general, the biggest complaint that they have about me is Matt just keeps moving the burden of proof on us. Matt doesn't want to adopt any burden of proof for his beliefs. Well, no, that's not true.
Right.
If I tell you what I believe, I'm happy to defend it, and you'll either agree or you won't agree. But when it comes to this God thing, atheism is not, I believe there are no gods. That's within the realm of atheism. It is, I am not convinced that you are correct, that there is a God. And my being unconvinced is not a position I need to defend. If I say that your argument is fallacious, that's a claim. I have to actually defend that. If I say that your God doesn't exist, I would have to deal with that as well and demonstrate that. But if I say your argument is unconvincing, and here's why it's unconvincing, I've met every burden of proof I need to. And as a matter of fact, Richard Carey wrote an article which I disagree with on a couple of fine points, but overall I'm probably on board, in that atheism either can't be viewed as something that has a burden of proof to meet, or it already has, in much the way that the the disbelief in invisible, inaudible buses has already met its burden of proof in that it is warranted to not believe this because there isn't sufficient evidence for it.
Right.
But.
Sorry, I forgot what I was going to say next. Oh, yeah, the thing I thought you were going to come up with was that people get frustrated about saying, I don't know. And it's like, well, if you don't have an answer for this, then my answer stands, which is obviously not true either.
Yeah, it's fine to tell people you don't know either.
Yeah,
right.
I don't know, but you're
the,
convinced that you do know.
Yeah,
so
which
I'd like to know why you know, how you know.
Right. And I know because of, Bob.
Okay.
It's ridiculous. And it just frustrates because you go through this argument again and again and again, and it's like we're not even getting to the meat and potatoes here. You just want to hash this out, and there's no answer for it because at the end of the day, we're all going to have to presuppose reason, and that's what we're stuck with.
As far as I can tell.
All right. Well, Brian,
thanks a lot, Brian.
Yeah, we're gonna have to let you go, but thanks for your call.
Well, the call screener was very helpful. She was very nice, and she got me back on after the call got dropped. And
That's what they let us know.
There you
Okay,
go.
Yeah, totally.